on the call that has been made by Rise Mzansi. Very good morning to you, Songezo. And just taking into consideration once again that this is an incident or text that happened on Thursday as well as Friday. Yesterday, there was a public address by the president, who's also, as we understand, the commander-in-chief of the SANDF. Nothing was said about this particular mission and what has taken place. And to date, since that statement has been released, we haven't heard anything official as yet from the Defense Ministry. This is now speaking about the minister herself, as well as the president, the commander-in-chief of the SANDF.
Good morning, Aldrin. And the first thing I want to say is to send condolences to the families of the soldiers that have perished in the DRC, and to keep those who have been injured in our prayers. As I understand, the number remains unknown, which is concerning in and of itself. But of course, the defense minister must address the South African people or the president, because this cannot be taken as business as usual. When you have South Africans engaged in combat far from home, this kind of incident deserves some accountability, and we are not seeing any.
Yeah, and when the minister or president eventually addresses the nation, what should they be telling us about what's happening in the DRC?
There is a context to this, and South Africans typically do not pay much attention to issues involving the military. And therefore, a large number of South Africans don't quite know why South African armed forces are in the DRC. There is a reason for that. There is a SADC mission, there is a UN mission, and it's important to keep explaining that over and over again to the South African people so they can understand it in context. The second thing, which is something that we've invited the defense minister to talk to us about, one of the issues we've invited to Scopa to talk about, is the chronic mismanagement in the Department of Defense and Department of Military Veterans, which fall under her portfolio. Granted, she's new. And secondly, the chronic underfunding of the Defense Force. It is almost criminally negligent to send South African soldiers so far from home without an operating base nearby, with air support, with additional inventory by way of ammunition and other support, in case of an attack like this. And lastly, failure of intelligence in predicting that this was going to happen. So there is a lot of accountability to that the South African people deserve.
Yeah, the Minister of Defense was actually on the SABC's Face the Nation with the Clement Banyatela last week, Tuesday, and this is following the trip that she had to the region. And one of the questions was around the resources that are available, and she did admit that indeed there's not enough equipment that is available. But one of the other points that she stressed was the issue of money and also the cutting of budgets for the various departments, including the SANDF. But we know that this is nothing new. Even last year, when the decision was taken to deploy the soldiers to the DRC, the alarm was raised to say that we don't have enough money to send soldiers to the DRC.
And one of the things that happens, Aldrin, is that also the financial support that is supposed to come from the United Nations doesn't always come promptly, which creates a cash shortfall for the Defense Force in any event. So there is a lot that is wrong in the system. The minister is new in the portfolio, but it would be really important for the minister to keep her appraisal of the state of the Defense Forces as candid or as honest as possible with the South African people. The South African National Defense Force and the Navy and the Air Force have got equipment that is almost inoperable. The trucks that we have, Aldrin, were bought or manufactured before you were born. And so that is a level of equipment that we are operating with. And it is not a good look either for a minister or any official to give the impression, as she did, that there are some problems, but generally things are okay. They are not.
Yeah, generally things are not okay. Then what should happen now going forward? There's been a call that has been made as well, that perhaps maybe we should see the SANDF troops that are deployed in the DRC being pulled out of that mission. The argument that I think it was Professor Mgomezulu has made is that unfortunately he believes that it's too late to do so. We must just see this one through.
Rise Mzansi and myself as leader have many times in the past said South Africans need to make a choice. Either we want an army or we don't. We cannot keep chronically underfunding the Defense Force and then sending off our fellow South Africans to some far off country or even locally to die. There is a budget coming up, Aldrin, in February. If that budget doesn't contain enough money for the defense forces to be turned around, MPs must reject it. Otherwise, the words that we all utter are not honest.
Yeah, because the former DA MP, who's also the former Shadow Minister of Defence, a point that he stressed in the conversation that he had with Masichaba a bit earlier on, that as it stands currently, we only have about 0.7% that is being allocated to the South African National Defence Force, and we know that this is chronically low if we take into consideration the amounts of money that other nations are spending on their soldiers to make sure that the borders are protected, sure, but there's also the other part, and that is these missions that we go into.
And it's not just international missions, also domestic missions.
Mm-hmm.
The Air Force has nearly collapsed. Only a few aircraft are operational. Our pilots are beginning to lose their competency certificate because they're not flying enough. And secondly, the Navy is also near collapse with a couple of the vessels operational, if not one. The submarines are almost inoperable for a very long time. And people continue to die, as there was a fatal accident in which about 4 members of the armed forces died some years ago. And it's a function of both funding as well as chronic mismanagement in the defense forces. I cannot stress that enough. If we are to give the defense forces more money, we need more financial accountability in the leadership structures of the defense force, and it's not there at the moment. It's not a good look. Adverse findings for years and years in the past and currently. It's totally unacceptable.
Yeah, well, we also have a situation where the former Minister of Defence is in the dock on allegations of corruption. But once again, it speaks to this question about getting the right people in the job, but also ensuring that there's accountability and holding people accountable.
No, absolutely, Aldrin. Look, I think, Aldrin, what we need is an overhaul of the leadership of the defense forces. There is no other way, because part of the problem that we see in the defense force is also a declining morale, because the junior officers that have joined the army in recent years have got absolutely no respect for the senior officers, who are usually incompetent and do not demonstrate the level of leadership that is required for an organization like that. And it shows in the audit outcomes that the Auditor General presents to Parliament year after year. Nothing short of an overhaul of the leadership and culture of the defense force is going to improve matters. And that means we cannot continue deploying South Africans to these missions with all of these systemic problems that we have back at the ranch.
Finally, Songezo, is there anything from Scopa that could be done, or maybe even from a parliamentary perspective as a whole, that could be done around allegations of private interest in the mining industry, and specifically in the DRC, being behind some of these decisions that we are seeing being taken in the country, say that we must go and deploy our soldiers, even though we don't have enough equipment or resources and even money to do so?
Look, Aldrin, I don't know the veracity of those allegations. We have invited the Minister of Defense to come to the Standing Committee on Public Accounts on the 18th of February. That is next month. And we'll look forward to engaging with her on these matters. I think what is important, because with these kind of things, there's also lots of conspiracies. Yeah. There is a UN mission. There is a SADC mission. We must be careful about presenting the facts as if the South Africans are there on their own frolic without an international mandate. But we would welcome any evidence and would certainly follow it up.
Thank you so much for your time. Songezo Zibi is the leader of Rise Mzansi and also the chairperson of Scopa.